everybody, my name is Trisha and I am a member of Team 8, and we're going to talk about the article on team decision making in virtual and face-to-face environments. And the rest of my team are made up of Tommy Liu, Polly Dillon, and Matthew Dean. So to introduce the topic, the theme that we're sharing with you today involves an investigation of the team decision-making abilities of two different types of teams. Our evidence involves a study of face-to-face and virtual teams and a comparison of their abilities to perform team decision-making functions. The study assigned looks at 195 students broken out into two different groups, 33 face-to-face teams and 32 virtual teams. The teams were assigned a hidden profile problem where the team was provided shared information and one member was provided specific information. The researchers looked at 9 different hypotheses incorporating various elements of decision-making characteristics required to find a solution to an assigned task. I will share the characteristics with you on the next slide. The decision-making characteristics can be broken out into 4 distinct categories with various subgroups listed within. 2 frameworks that they talk about using in the paper were defined as a judge or solve mentality, indicating whether or not they would have to come to a consensus about a topic or judge, or create the solution to an issue at hand or solve. To perform this, the researchers indicated whether the teams needed to use a conveyance or information sharing approach or convergence or information processing approach to reach their goal most efficiently. The media features and psychological states are methods of interactions between the teams that were compared amongst the face-to-face and the virtual teams groups. My colleagues will go into detail about which teams exhibited the most productive utilization of these combinations of characteristics in order to reach the intended goals of the assigned tasks in the study. And they will do that on the next slide.
Thanks, Trisha. So today, concept of a team transcends the boundary of distance, time, organization, and cultures. Many organizations have been increasing the emphasis on exploring the virtual platform and tap the strengths of diversity in terms of skill, experience, knowledge, and expertise across the globe. Globalization and advancement in information and communication technology are a direct cause of it. But how effective are these virtual teams using the IM compared to the face-to-face teams? What are the advantage and disadvantage between the traditional teams and virtual teams? According to the research and test study, in the traditional face-to-face teams, some of the advantages, according to the research, are lower competitive interdependence and relationship conflict. You will discuss and consider more total information. You require less time to reach decisions. And you can operate with greater efficiency, consider more unique cues, increase the persuasiveness of the message with nonverbal gestures, and it has no effect on potency, integrative conflict management, and constructive controversy despite the way the decision is framed. Next, Matt will go over the advantages and disadvantages of the virtual teams.
All right, thanks, Tommy. Virtual teams, as the article notes, have both advantages and disadvantages in today's extremely technological world, though the disadvantages do outweigh the advantages. First, we'll go over the advantages. When thinking of virtual teams, the article uses instant messaging as the medium. However, most of us probably today think about video conferencing, Google Docs, which a lot of us use for class, IMing, as the article does note, email, ERP systems, things like that, not just instant messaging. Routine and repetitive tasks without much interaction or complex decision-making is typically best for virtual teams just because of the repetitive nature. You don't necessarily need to be communicating that much, and it generally comes down to standardized processes. So typically you would think of entering data into a system and not necessarily like strategic enterprise-wide planning or something like that. The transmission of information is also just the actual receiving of the information can be extremely fast, and ease of access can be very, easy. And you can get things at a moment's notice. We're going to see a con on that on the next slide with the disadvantages, so we'll see that in just a minute. It is important to note that the article does make it very clear that virtual teams, they're in practice as opposed to in the lab setting, for the article can be very different. Lab settings can be more hindered than the actual field settings, because field settings can have teams that generally work together more often, or use various types of tools, not just instant messaging. So for the next slide, we'll go into the disadvantages. So as you can see, there's no shortage of disadvantages. Reading your audience in a virtual team can be very difficult. Team members can be perceived as impolite or manipulative, and the ability to key in on social cues, mannerisms, and body language can be close to impossible in a virtual setting. Pretty much everyone experiences this in the workplace. How often do you feel when you have a face-to-face, you need a face-to-face meeting based on some miscommunication in an email or over IM? People can generally feel threatened. You're challenging the position, and the entire process can feel generally, rather cold, which is obviously not great for any team setting, let alone a virtual one where you're not in person. The general exchange of information, as noted in the advantages section, can be great, but making sense of the communication can be difficult for the person who receives the message, which then delays the response back from that person. So this can slow down the process overall of sharing information across the team. Then this leads to deficiencies in decision making when the subject matter is complex or too difficult to manage without a face-to-face interaction. In general, the more complex the topic, the harder it is to explain in a virtual setting. And finally, all this leads to competitive interdependence and relationship conflict, which again is based on reading your audience, understanding the information being exchanged, and just, again, the general complexity of the subject. To close it out, Paulie's going to take it from here.
This research was in line of existing literature reporting that virtual teams often have worse experiences than that of face-to-face teams. This was evidenced by a general trend toward higher competitive interdependence and relationship conflict. Information sampling is also limited, and thus, virtual teams had lower integrative conflict management, constructive feedback, and team potency. In conclusion, the research stated that virtual teams are not well equipped for handling complex decision-making, though instant messaging, despite the potential anonymity offered by instant messaging, and the reduction in production blocking activity issues. Teams utilizing instant messaging for decision-making must be informed of the heightened likelihood of their inquisitive comments, which may be viewed as intimidating and antagonistic. To help mitigate these effects, it is advised to use friendly language or even emoticons on tasks that require high convergence but low synchronicity. On the other side, receivers of the message need to be careful not to read into task-focused message and assume that it is too direct, forceful, or aggressive in its nature. Another finding that the research uncovered was that as a discussion becomes longer, tensions rise as team members try to move to a decision without success. Ironically, this process increases information sharing, may be actually critical and key to making the best and most informed decision. Ways to mitigate this is to provide training that longer exchanges does not necessarily indicate an argument or a win-lose outlook. The paper also states that establishing the norm of creating devil's advocacy within the team to question will help in establishing greater understanding of the task on hand. The fourth finding highlighted the advantages of text-based chats, in that status effects, domineering personalities could be removed by using anonymous aliases. This in turn effectively means that the more task-oriented work may be accomplished with that of virtual teams due to the de-emphasis of interpersonal and social cues. On the other hand, the research found that the text-based chats were inefficient and hampered the use of effective team practices. Thus, practitioners of text-based chats must weigh both the negative and the positives of instant messaging for decision-making. Overall, as leaders, it is imperative to understand both the benefits and drawbacks of teamwork in different settings. By utilizing the strengths of both mediums, teams will be able to become more efficient and productive on their task on hand. From Group 8, we thank you for your time.